Well, okay, so here we are at coming up on week 8, or into week 8. We're halfway through the class. We have gone through a good chunk of the toolbar. We've definitely looked at some of the various palettes, and we've explored some of the options. And now we are, well, one of the things we did this week was look at the shape tool. And so we are going to do that right now. And we also looked a little bit at Picasso Web and how that can be utilized in a couple different ways. But today we're just going to look at the shape tool. So by default, you have a setting up here in your options that creates a shape layer. And that's what we did last night. There are two other options there. The one next to the shape layer is one that will create paths. And the one next to that will just simply fill pixels. So, for example, on a new layer, I could create this box, but you'll notice down here in my layers palette that it doesn't have a mask attached to it. It's just simply the box on a layer that can be moved around. And we did not use that one last night. Last night we added one that was a shape layer. So when you're in here, one of the first option is shape layer, and again, next class we're going to look at some of the things we can do to text and shapes with paths. So, but for now we just worked on the shape layer, and what we did was we created a box and we discussed what was happening here on the layer. And there's a mask, and then there's the color of the object here. And so we looked at some of the different styles that are by default in Photoshop, and we looked at some of the qualities that those have. So these are preset styles in Photoshop, and you'll remember that in the layers palette, when you apply one of those styles to this shape, it shows you which effects were used. And if you double click on any of those, the layer styles box comes up, and this is what we used last night. So in this case, to get this style, one thing that is being used is the inner glow, and you can see it's got this opacity, there's no noise. It is using a gradient here, and look, we can change the gradient to any of these other colors. And again, this is the inner glow, so it's not changing the entire thing, but it's changing the inner glow portion of this. So you can change those, and each one of these style options over here has a variety of controls in the center of this window. I'm not going to go through each and every one of those right now, but I will say that you can turn them on or off by using the check mark. So notice if there's nothing checked here, all we have is that same black box that we originally created. If we, I can't remember which ones here were selected, but if we select the ones in that preset, they will all show again. So by selecting the check mark, it turns off or on those options. So to get the options to show over here, you have to turn blue or select that particular group. And if you'll recall, some of the things we could do was change the angle, and some of them are hard to see unless you change other things. So for example, here in the drop shadow, it was kind of hard to see the angle because it was sitting right underneath of this thing. So you can change the angle and the distance and the size. We talked about all the various contours that are available, and this is in many of these options. And we went on to the inner shadow, and there's these different, so the blend mode is working within the background, and how in this case on the inner shadow, actually it's not the background, it's what's inside of here, and how it's blending with whatever color is going to be selected here. And those also, depending on the size of these things and the colors that are inside of here, may or may not really be easy to see. So this black box only, or this blue, originally it was that light blue rounded edged box. It's hard to tell what some of these look like, and that's why I think creating that light colored box or a black box is a good way to start, just to see what some of these things do. So we looked at all of these, and I encourage you to do that on your own. I've added a couple links in the weekly folder here that cover some of this. If you go to your help menu right here in Photoshop and go to Photoshop Help and type in layer styles, you'll see all kinds of definitions of each of these things, so you can do that. I have on my machine, I noticed before I started this recording, I have a couple styles that were downloaded. So here's one, and here's another one. So as we talked last night, I mean, there are some amazing things out there on the internet, and these are just some of the free styles that I had downloaded at one time or another for the class. So that's something we did last night, was we looked at these styles. The other thing that we did last night was create a panoramic image. And so real quick, I'm just going to go to through the steps that we did for that, and then we'll be done. So to create a panoramic image, you need some pictures, and you need to know where they are. And you go to File and Automate, and at the very bottom is Photo Merge. And so we used 3 pictures from the CD which I had given you, and with any luck at all, this computer's going to go, aha, there we go. So there were some options, and I gave you a little time in class to check out a couple of these. You browse for your images, and those were in week 7, and they were these 3 pictures. And this, depending on your machine at home here, if you select OK, it's going to take a minute to blend them together. And what happens basically is Photoshop masks areas of the image and combines them as best it can, which in this case with these 3 pictures is pretty darn amazing, because they get twisted slightly and disorganized a little bit and turned. You need to crop them. And one thing that I remember last night, remember in your cropping tool that it keeps the settings from the last time you used it. So if, like for example in class, people were saying, hey, I can't use my crop tool because it was set with a certain width and a certain height. If you have numbers in there, you can select the clear button to get rid of them. So we cropped the image, and then we rotated it, and we had our cool panoramic look. And we checked out over here in the layers palette, you can see the masked areas and how it's working. And remember, you can turn on and off the various layers here. So that's about what we covered in last night, other than the Picasa web. So if you email me a link to your Picasa web images, that'll be extra credit, maybe. But anyway, have a great week, and we'll see you the next time.